And they make it like a haunted dog. Yeah, you're probably right, Coyote. That's the interesting thing, like...
Hound of the Baskervilles. To take part in the murder...
Quiet, you. This was so early in, like, CD-ROMs generally, 1991, that they didn't really know what would work and what didn't. So that's not to excuse this to say it's a good piece of software, but I can at least understand their fact that, you know, they hadn't... there was an understanding of user usage and how it would really... You know, they were kind of figuring things out, even though it is a bit lazy. Yeah, the intro is better than the actual gameplay. It's true. All right, so we were looking through the story of Hound of the Baskervilles.
September's calendar with all important dates.
Yes, we were in October, I believe.
October's calendar with all important dates having been ringed in red.
So we were on the 19th and 20th. So what happens if I click in the right-hand corner? Okay, I can't get to November from here. So if we can't do that, hopefully maybe when we complete the 20th, something would happen. We'll have to see. But first, we have Friday, October 19th.
Would you like to read these notes at your leisure, or shall I summarize them for you? Mind
Both.
you, if I do, I can't promise to cover everything.
Oh, don't worry, sir. We will be doing both.
Friday, October the 19th. We instructed Sir Henry that he should go as invited to Metropolitan House for dinner, and return alone via the moor path to the Grimpen Road. We convinced him then that we were returning to London, and by a ruse confirmed our presence there by telegram later. We then travelled to Coombe Tracey to see Laura Lyons. Holmes confronted her with several papers from his pocket, including a photograph of Mr. and Mrs. Vandalore. Thus induced, she told us what she said was the whole truth of the matter. We travelled to the railway station and met Inspector Lestrade. Armed, we went to Metropolitan House and lay in wait 200 yards from the door. Fog surrounded the mire. Within the house, two figures talked over their drinks. One left the house and proceeded to an outhouse in the orchard, then returned. Holmes became anxious that the rising fog might ruin our endeavours, so we retreated to higher ground, but perhaps too far to intervene. He dropped to his knees and put his ear to the ground. He heard someone coming. A sound of quick footsteps broke the silence, and joining them a thin, continuous patter from somewhere in the fog. Then out of the fog came the Hound, a huge, coal-black beast, none such as mortal eyes had seen before. Fire burst from its open mouth. Its eyes glowed with a smouldering glare, its muzzle and back outlined in flickering flame. The Hound leapt down the track, hard on the heels of a running figure. Holmes and I fired, and the creature gave a hideous yell. It leapt onto its victim, and at that instant Holmes emptied his revolver into its flank. With a howl of agony, it rolled upon its back and fell limp.
Whoa.
The victim lay insensible, but the rescue was in time. I touched the Hound. His coat was covered in phosphorus. We stormed into Metropolitan House, only to find, tied to a beam, a figure trussed up in a sheet, tied and gagged. We released the prisoner and learnt where we might find our quarry. Outside, the fog bank lay like white wool. We would have to wait for it to clear before the pursuit could begin. October's calendar, with all important dates having been ringed in red.
Well, I like the idea of it, Snatcher. But yeah, you illustrated the point, right? Even, forget the developers, even people themselves didn't know, CD-ROM was such a novelty. You didn't even know how you would use it yourself. Exactly right.
Would you like to read these notes at your leisure?
I would like to read them, yes. All right, Friday, 19th October. Up early this morning, but Holmes a foot earlier still, for I saw him as I dressed, coming up the drive. Dark, thank you for the 5 gift subs. Thank you, Dark. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Rufus Ruffians, Schemo, Kisk, McQueen III, Video Game Bar Space Station, and Jake, IR Nub. Thank you so much, Dark. How many gift subs is that for Dark? 205. Wow. Thank you, Dark. Appreciate it. The dark side. Oh, yeah. Oh, I like that echo. Yes. Dark, how do you feel about being referred to as the dark side? I like that indeed. The question is whether you like it, as Echo dubbed it to you. Okay, you're good with that, Kim. Oh, cool. Oh, you did. Nice. Yeah, I mean, I don't consider that a spoiler. It's like game content that they expect us to access, but the game is so incompetent we can't even figure out. The UI isn't even in place to navigate among the game's contents. The game.
What's up with that?
I don't know what's up with that. I do not know. All right, Friday, 19th October. Up earlier this morning, but Holmes a foot earlier still, for I saw him as I dressed, coming up the drive. He had been to Grimpen already, and he was rubbing his hands with the joy of action. He had sent telegrams to Princetown as to the death of Selden, so that we should not be troubled any further with that matter, and to his faithful Cartwright, to set the lad's mind at rest about his safety, and to Scotland Yard in London. "We should have a full day today," he said. "The nets are all in place, and the drag is about to begin. We'll know before the day is out whether we have caught our wily pike, or whether it has got through the meshes." Ah, okay, cool. Thanks, Nico. Good evening, Bednow. Good evening. Holmes then gave his orders to Sir Henry and myself, and the baronet remarked that my companion looked like a general who was planning a battle with his chief of staff. Sir Henry and I both received an invitation to dine with the Stapletons tonight, but Holmes said that I should send my apologies because I would have to return with him to London immediately after breakfast. Sir Henry was still to go. To Stapleton's. Okay, yes. The baronet was obviously deeply hurt by what he regarded as our desertion, and a little apprehensive at being left alone at the hall. He wanted to come to London with us, but Holmes reminded him that he had promised to do what he was told, and that his post of duty was on Dartmoor. He assured Sir Henry that it was only the most urgent business that required us to be in town, and we hoped very soon to return to Devonshire. He was to reinforce my own message of regret to the Stapletons. Holmes had one last instruction to Sir Henry. He was to get Perkins to drive him to Merrypit House this evening, and then to send back the trap, letting everyone know that he intended to walk home after supper across the moor. "As you valued your life," warned Holmes, "do not go across the moor in any direction save along the straight path which leads from Merrypit House to the Grimpen Road, and is your natural way home." Sir Henry protested that to walk alone across the moor was precisely what Holmes had cautioned him never to do, but my friend averred that he might do it with safety, and that he had every confidence in the baronet's nerve and courage. So Baskerville agreed. I was naturally much astounded at this program, for Holmes had said nothing to me about any of this, and I had been looking forward to our dinner this evening and to the company that I hoped would be there. That's certainly a reference to what's her name? Beryl Stapleton. Hey, Mr. Viking. I could not understand why Holmes wished me to go with him to London, so that we were both absent at a moment which he himself declared to be critical, but he would not enlighten me, and I knew that I would get nothing from him until he wished to tell me. There was nothing for it but implicit obedience. We drove to Coombe Tracy, a journey of a couple of hours, leaving the rueful baronet behind. Cartwright was waiting at the station for orders. Holmes told him to take the next train to London, and then to wire Sir Henry, in Holmes's name, and again another typo, to ask him to look for a pocketbook which Holmes had dropped at Baskerville Hall. Holmes then picked up a wire himself in the station office. It was from Scotland Yard. "Now, Watson," he said, "I think that we cannot employ our time better than by calling upon your acquaintance, Mrs. Laura Lyons." His plan of campaign was at last beginning to be evident. The baronet would himself be convinced that we were in London, and would thus convince everyone else. The telegram that Cartwright was to send in Holmes's name from London would remove the last suspicion from Sir Henry's mind. I see, okay. Our quarry would not suspect that we should actually return at the instant when we were likely to be needed. We found Laura Lyons in her office. Holmes asked her directly why she had withheld information about her rendezvous with Sir Charles, and demanded to know what was the connection between her request to meet Sir Charles at his gate at 10 o'clock at night and the circumstances that this was the place and hour of his death. She denied there was any connection between the two events, but Holmes insisted that we should succeed in establishing the connection because he regarded the case as one of murder. The evidence, he said, might implicate not only herself, but some of her friends. When Holmes hinted at the names of those others whom he suspected, Laura Lyons sprang from her seat, her eyes flashed, and she challenged us to prove it. Holmes drew several papers from his pocket. There was a photograph, taken 4 years ago, endorsed Mr. and Mrs. Vandalore. There were also some written descriptions by trustworthy witnesses of the Vandalores. Laura Lyons had no difficulty in recognizing the photographs and the descriptions, though at first they were obscure to me. She looked at us with the set, rigid face of a desperate woman. At last she told us the whole truth about her note to Sir Charles Baskerville, but I had heard truths from Mrs. Laura Lyons before, and I swore to myself that I would need more convincing than mere words. I was not sure whether Holmes felt the same as I did, whether his subtle mind was laying another trap, or whether he believed her, for he told her that she had had a fortunate escape, and had been walking for some months very near the edge of a precipice. He then wished her good morning, and told her that it was probable that she should very shortly hear from us again. We returned to the station to wait for the arrival of the express from London. Holmes was well pleased that difficulty after difficulty was thinning away in front of us. He declared that soon he would be in a position of being able to put into a single connected narrative one of the most singular and sensational crimes of modern times. "Students of criminology," he said, "will remember the analogous incidents in Godno in Little Russia in the year 66. And of course there are the Anderson murders in North Carolina, but this case possesses some features which are entirely its own. Even now we have no clear case against our very wily foe, but I shall be very much surprised if it is not clear enough before we go to bed this night." The London Express came roaring into the station, and a small, wiry bulldog of a man sprang from the first-class carriage. We all three shook hands, and I saw at once from the reverential way in which Lestrade gazed at my companion that he had learned a good deal since the days when they had first worked together. Holmes said that we had 2 hours before we needed to think of starting. He suggested we employed the time in getting some dinner. After that, he promised he would take the London fog out of Lestrade's mouth by giving him a breath of the pure night air of Dartmoor. Lestrade had never been to Dartmoor before. "I don't suppose you will forget your first visit," said Holmes. And here we got the telegram. "Wire received. Stop. Coming down with unsigned warrant. Stop. Arrive. 5:40. Stop. Lestrade." "Mr. and Mrs. Vandalore." Ah, yes, look at them in all of their fineries. Is this the same? Wait, is this the same? Is this the same woman that was posing as Beryl Stapleton in the other photo? That would be crazy if it were. But then, yes, we got the Mr. Vandalore is apparently a college professor. "Solid and accomplished education, St. Oliver's Private School, Yorkshire. Principal, Mr. Oh, he's a principal of St. Oliver's Private School. Mr. J. Vandalore, M.A. Assisted by an efficient staff of resident and visiting masters. Scorton Grammar School near Catterick, Yorkshire, founded 1720. Headmaster Mr. C.M. Bragg, University College London. The above school has been reorganized under a scheme of the endowed school commissioners and suitable buildings provided for the accommodation of boarders. Pupils prepared for the Oxford and Cambridge locals. The terms, which are moderate, may be had on application. Huh. Okay. Vandalore. Divisional Police Report, Yorkshire, 1888. The following character descriptions were supplied by reliable witnesses at the time of the subject's disappearance in August 1886. They are reproduced here at the request of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who is understood to be pursuing inquiries in conjunction with Scotland Yard. 1. Mr. and Mrs. Vandalore were an odd couple. He was cool and self-contained, but she was a passionate creature who liked company, better suited to life in the town, if you get my drift. It was no surprise they ran into trouble. 2. Vandalore was a scoundrel, a poser, a pompous ass. Learned his tricks in the proper school, I'm sure, but not a man to trust if he was guarding your rear. He had charm, some would say, of a curious kind, always playing one part or another, an agile actor, but bland and slippery beneath the grease paint, the sort of fellow who generally puts his skills to bad use. Whatever became of that woman of his? Proud little thing, provocative, never quite fitted in, though. 3. Mrs. Vandalore. I remember her. Not quite the perfect figure, of course, but which of us has these days, with fashion being what it is? A little too, well, fancy for her own good. Not that the men minded. Did she wear a wig? We always had the feeling they were more of a partnership than a marriage. He was a blackguard, no doubt of it. Quite disarming at times, but a blackguard nonetheless. Yeah, you're right, Emma. It's true, it's true. All right, we got from Holmes to Sir Henry. Pocketbook dropped at Hall. Stop if found. Please send by registered post to 221B Baker Street, London. Stop, Holmes. Stop. Okay. Balance of porterage. Friday, 19th of October, continued. One of Sherlock Holmes's defects, if indeed one may call it a defect, is that he is exceedingly loath to communicate his full plans to any other person until the instant of their fulfillment. His masterful nature loves to dominate and surprise those who are around him, but also his professional caution urges him never to take chances. The result was never so trying as during our long drive in the darkness. The great ordeal was before us, yet Holmes said nothing, and I could only surmise what his course of action could be. We talked of trivial matters when our nerves were tense with emotion and anticipation. When we passed Franklin's house and drew near the hall, we sent the wagonette back to Coombe Tracy and walked to Metropolitan House. All three of us were armed. Lestrade glanced with a shiver round him at the huge lake of fog that lay over the Grimpen Mire, and Holmes asked us to walk on tiptoe and not to talk above a whisper once we saw the end of our journey. We stopped 200 yards from the house to make an ambush. Holmes sent me forward to see what was happening. Keeping in the shadow of the low wall which surrounded the stunted orchard, I looked through the uncurtained window. There were only 2 people in the room. They sat with their profile toward me on either side of the round table. One was talking with animation, but the other looked pale and distrait. As I watched, the former came outside for a moment to an outhouse in the corner of the orchard, and then rejoined the other, who had refilled his glass and was leaning back in chair. I returned to Holmes to report. The dense white fog that hung over the mire was drifting slowly in our direction, and banked itself up like a wall on that side of us. The moon shone on it, and it looked like a giant, great, shimmering ice field, where the heads of the distant towers as rocks borne upon its surface. It was 10 o'clock already, and Holmes was concerned that the fog would disarrange our plans, and that life itself might depend upon something happening before the fog covered the path. A light in the kitchen went out, and we guessed the servants had left that room. But in the other room, the 2 figures still chatted over their drinks. Already the first wisps of fog were curling across the golden square of the lighted window. The fog wreaths came crawling round both corners of the house and rolled slowly into one dense bank on which the upper floor and the roof floated like a strange ship upon a shadowy sea. Holmes stamped his feet in his impatience, declaring that in half an hour we wouldn't be able to see our hands in front of us. We fell back to higher ground until we were a half-mile from the house, but Holmes was anxious that we would be too far to intervene in time. Then he dropped suddenly on his knees, put his ear to the ground, and said he heard someone coming. A sound of quick steps broke the silence. Crouching among the stones, we stared intently. The steps grew louder, and through the fog, as through a curtain, there stepped a figure, emerging into the clear, looking round in surprise at the starlit night, then coming swiftly along the path, passing close to where we lay, and going up on the long slope behind us, glancing continually over either shoulder, like one who is ill at ease. I heard a sharp click as Holmes cocked his pistol. There was a thin, crisp, continuous patter from somewhere in the heart of that crawling bank. The cloud was within 50 yards of us, and we glared at it, uncertain what horror was about to break out. Holmes's face was pale and exultant, his eyes shining brightly in the moonlight. Suddenly they started forward in a rigid fixed stare, and his lips parted in amazement. At the same instant, Lestrade gave a yell of terror and threw himself face downward upon the ground. I sprang to my feet, my inert hand grasping my pistol, my mind paralyzed by the dreadful shape which had sprung out upon us from the shadows of the fog. A hound it was, an enormous coal-black hound, but not such a hound as mortal eyes had ever seen. Fire burst from its open mouth. Its eyes glowed with a smoldering glare. Its muzzle and hackles and dewlap were outlined in flickering flame. Never in the delirious dream of a disordered brain could anything more savage, more appalling, more hellish be conceived than that dark form and savage face which broke upon us. With long bounds, the huge creature was leaping down the track, following hard upon the first figure. It had passed us before we recovered our nerve. Then Holmes and I both fired together, and the creature gave a hideous howl. It did not pause, however, but bounded onward. We saw its victim looking back, face white in the moonlight, hands raised in horror, glaring helplessly at the frightful thing in pursuit. Never have I seen a man run as Holmes ran that night. I am reckoned fleet of foot, but he outpaced me as much as I outpaced the little professional. In front of us we heard scream after scream and the deep roar of the hound. I was in time to see the beast spring upon its victim, hurling the figure to the ground, whirring at its throat. But the next instant Holmes had emptied 5 barrels of his revolver into the creature's flank. With a last howl of agony and a vicious snap in the air, it rolled upon its back and fell limp upon its side. I pressed my pistol to the dreadful shimmering head, but the hound was dead. Its victim lay insensible. We tore away the clothes at the neck and breathed a sigh of gratitude when we saw that there was no sign of a wound and that the rescue had been in time. The eyelids shivered, and there was a feeble attempt to move. Lestrade thrust his brandy flask forward, and 2 frightened eyes looked up. The creature itself was not pure bloodhound and not pure mastiff, but a combination of the two. Gaunt, savage, and as large as a small lioness. Even now, in the stillness of death, the huge jaws seemed to be dripping with a bluish flame, and the small, deep-set, cruel eyes were ringed with fire. I placed my hand upon the glowing muzzle, and as I held them up, my own fingers smoldered and gleamed in the darkness. It was phosphorus. The creature's victim tried to stagger up after another mouthful of brandy, but was still ghastly pale and trembling in every limb. So we gave what ease we could, but Holmes said we must leave for the moment, for the rest of our work must be done, and every moment was of importance. We had our case, but the shots must have warned our quarry that the game was up. We returned to Metropolitan House, and on the upper floor found one of bedroom doors unlocked. Holmes struck the door just over the lock with the flat of his foot, and it flew open, pistol in hand. We all 3 rushed into the room, but there was no sign of any desperate villain. Instead, we found the room had been fashioned into a small museum, and the walls were lined by a number of glass-topped cases full of a collection of butterflies and moths. In the center of the room there was an upright beam. To this post a figure was tied, so swathed and muffled in sheets used to secure it that one could not tell whether it was a man or woman. One towel passed around the throat and was secured at the back of the pillar. Another covered the lower part of the face, and over it 2 eyes full of a dreadful questioning stared back at us. We tore of the gag, unswathed the bonds, and the prisoner sank to the floor. There was the clear red wheal of a whiplash across the neck. When we had told the prisoner that the hound was dead, we learnt where we might find our quarry, but Holmes looked through the window at the fog bank that lay like a white wool against the window, and it was evidence to us all that pursuit was in vain until the fog had lifted. Meanwhile, we left Lestrade in charge of the house, while Holmes and I went back to the hound's intended victim on the moor, whose shattered nerves brought on a high, delirious fever by morning.
October's calendar, with all important dates having been ringed in red.
What about buying stuff on credit? Huh? Buy it on credit. All right. So we got, I guess, sort of 2 more days. Oh, yeah, we got 3 subjects.
Would you like to read these notes at your leisure, or shall I summarize them for you? Mind you, if I do, I can't promise to cover everything.
Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, those are just people choosing Spaz to type in slot, but that's their choice. They don't need to. Just trying to make things more convenient for people. That's why sometimes, Basil, you've got
Saturday, October the 20th. This morning, led by the prisoner from Merripit House, we discovered the pathway through the mire, marked out as it was by wands. We retrieved Sir Henry's missing boot. Then, within the mire, we discovered the hound's lair, a deserted miner's cottage where it had been chained. Holmes pointed to the moor. Never yet have we helped to track down more dangerous a villain than lies yonder. October's calendar, with all important dates having been ringed in.
Oh, that was a short one. Okay.
Would you like to?
Yeah, let's read it. Okay, Saturday, 20th October. This morning that fog had lifted, led by the eager figure of the prisoner released from Merripit House last night. We found the pathway through the mire. A small wand planted here and there showed where the path twisted among those green scummed pits and fell quagmires which barred the way of the strangers. Rank reeds and lush slimy water plants sent an odor of decay and a heavy miasmatic vapor onto our faces, while a false step plunged us more than once thigh-deep into the dark, quivering bog, which shook for yards in soft undulations around our feet. Its tenacious grip plucked at our heels, as if some malignant hand was tugging us down into those obscene depths. Once only we saw a trace that someone had passed that way before us. Holmes retrieved an old black boot. Myers, Toronto, was printed on the leather inside. It was Sir Henry's boot. More than that, we were never destined to know, though there was much that we might surmise. There was no chance of finding footsteps in the mire, for the rising mud oozed swiftly in upon them. But as we at last reached firmer ground beyond the morass, we all looked eagerly for them. But no slightest sign of them ever met our eyes. Somewhere in the heart of the great Grimpen mire, down in the fell slime of the morass which had sucked our quarry down, that cold and cruel-hearted creature is forever buried. Many other traces we did find in the bog-girt island where that savage alley had been hid. A huge driving wheel and a shaft half filled with rubbish showed the position of an abandoned mine. Beside it were the crumbling remains of the cottages of the miners, driven away no doubt by the foul reek of the surrounding swamp. In one of these, a staple and chain with a quantity of gnawed bones showed where the animal had been confined. A skeleton with a tangle of brown hair adhering to it lay among the debris. "A dog," said Holmes. "By Jove, a curly-haired spaniel." It was evident that this was where the beast had been kept secret, though its voice could not always be silenced. So the hound ate the spaniel? This is terrible. We found a tin of paste, which was no doubt the luminous mixture with which the creature was daubed. It was suggested, of course, said Holmes, by the story of the family hellhound, and by the desire to frighten old Sir Charles to death. No wonder, added Holmes, that the poor devil of a convict man had screamed, as we ourselves might have done, when he saw such a creature bounding through the darkness of the moor upon his track. It was a cunning device, for, apart from the chance of driving your victim to his death, what peasant would venture to inquire too closely into such a creature should he get sight of it, as many have done upon the moor? Holmes made a dramatic gesture with his long arm toward the huge mottled expanse of green splotched bog, which stretched away until it merged into the russet slopes of the moor. I said it in London, Watson, declared my companion, and I say it again now, that never yet have we helped to hunt down a more dangerous quarry than the one who is lying yonder. I did not doubt that it was true. The Hound of the Baskervilles. There he is. There he is. Part bloodhound, part mastiff. Grimpenmeyer. Oh, that's the brown hair of the spaniel? Oh, damn it. A deer stalker. I actually used to have one. That was my grandfather's. I don't know whatever happened to it, but I actually did have one. It was like a dead ringer. In fact, I actually wore it as part of a Sherlock Holmes costume for Halloween when I was a kid. And we went to a house where I guess they had a housekeeper who didn't speak English. And my friend who was, my friend dressed as like a guy in like army fatigues. And so she saw me here with this trench coat, my friend with his army fatigues, even though we were kids, we're about like 11, maybe 12. But here she saw us coming to the door. She had no idea what Halloween was. And so we knocked on the door. She like saw us through. It was like a glass door. And she's like, La Policia, La Policia. Like she was threatening to call the police on us because she was afraid that or something. She didn't want to let us. She didn't even want to like open the door to talk to us. And I was wearing my the Sherlock Holmes deerstalker cap with a trench coat and whatever else. All right. Anyway, sorry, random memory. Label for scent bottle, purchased London, September 1888. Found Dartmoor, October 1888. Maybe she did call the police. We didn't stick around long enough to find out, but she clearly had no idea what Halloween was. All right, Farrow's Phosphorus Paint, Farrow & Son, 8 GT, Tower Street, London. Phosphorus Paint label, Grimpenmeyer, 20th October, 1888. Bradley's Tobaccos, Ralph Bradley & Sons, tobacco manufacturers, roll spinners, Cavendish and nail rod makers. Specialties, Virginia Flake, American Flake, Best Bird's Eye, Standard Mixture, Golden Virginia, for pipe or cigarette. Bradley, Oxford Street, London West. Label found on Dartmoor. Now, we didn't run. We just walked over to the next house. It was clear. I mean, like, we weren't going to press the point. We weren't going to, because she didn't give us a treat, we weren't going to play a trick. Apparently, she was already tricked just by our costumes alone. We figured she had had enough, so we did continue
October's
on.
calendar with all important dates having been ringed in red.
We are almost done, Eiley. I think we just have... Okay, we saw all of the... So now we just have to see
September's calendar with...
We just have to see November now, which is located in... All right, where did Nico say it was? Somewhere on the desktop here. Oh, slightly revealed paper on the main page right above the rolled up map. Oh, wow. See, that's really terrible that they couldn't even, like... They should have made it in, like, a different colored envelope or something. So I assume it's, like, right here. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, if I hadn't read this book before, I might actually try to solve the mystery before we have it revealed to us. But I already have read the book, so I don't know. Not to say that I was paying, like, super close attention, but... Nothing I read there seemed completely out of line with my memory of the book, which is that well, obviously we know the mystery of the Hound, right? So it was colored with this phosphorus paint, and it was stored there and let loose to scare Sir Charles Baskerville to death. And then also, I guess, what's his face? It also went after Selden. But yeah, so I guess the mystery, as Rufus barks on cue, is that it's Stapleton, if I remember correctly, who's the neighbor, and his sister Beryl, whom Sir Henry was courting, is actually his wife, who he was like forcing to be courted, I guess. I forgot exactly how he wants. The motive is, I guess, to get the. I guess he wants them to marry, maybe, so that he gets the house. I've forgotten the exact thing about how he actually planned to actually get possession and ownership of the estate, though. That part I don't remember. Your husband is a Sherlock Holmes book now. Oh wow. Yeah, the problem with this is this is very loosely speaking a game. Yeah, and it's more just the book adapted for CD-ROM. All right, so
there were a number of strands of the case that had to be cleared up, but the evidence was all there, and we knew who our murderer was. I've reserved the final papers for this sealed package at the end, so that viewers might assess the evidence for themselves and calculate Holmes's methods in ascertaining the culprit. The package includes one Metropolitan police report containing statements by Sherlock Holmes and 2 prominent witnesses, one telegram to Holmes from Yorkshire, hitherto unpublished, one commercial receipt from London, one entry from Holmes's private Index of Crimes, 5 pages from my typewritten journal containing a summary of the case by Holmes, 1 page from my personal diary, J.H.W. The solution to the Hound of the Baskervilles. Are you sure you wish to look at it yet?
Oh, I'm sure, yes. I was trying to remember. Yeah, so they actually cut it in the instructions or at the start of the game. He had that same dialogue, but they cut him off after the first. It definitely sounded that way on the audio, and this part confirms it. That he only mentioned the police report as being part of the package, and he left out all of the other components of the package, which is weird. All right, so yeah, we'll do the listening horn, and then I guess we'll read through the full thing. It's probably going to be somewhat lengthy. We'll see.
Solution. Lestrade's report shows the following. Stapleton was responsible for the death of Sir Charles Baskerville and was plotting the death of Sir Henry. Every sign suggests that he lost his life fleeing into the Grimpen mire. Stapleton was not his real name, and his sister was in fact his wife. It was he that dogged Sir Henry in London. He was a schoolmaster in the north of England, and had come to grief under atrocious circumstances, then disappeared with his wife. Laura Lyons had been infatuated with him and was unaware of his marriage. On her divorce, she hoped to marry him. Thus, she had become his tool. Mrs. Stapleton refused to help her husband to lay a trap for Sir Charles, and was mistrusted from that point forth. For that reason he took her to London with him, and imprisoned her in her room. Wishing to warn Sir Henry, she sent the note. On the night of the Hound's appearance, she had argued with her husband, knowing of his intentions that night, and was then tied up by him. Sunday, November the 25th. Holmes's comments on the case were as follows. The family portrait did not lie. Stapleton was a Baskerville. He had married Beryl Garcia in Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. It's Costa Rica. All right. We actually need to...
Created by Michael Hodges, John Chasey, Fergus MacNeil, Clement Chambers, Adrian Turner, and Simon Goodenough.
It's good enough for me.
Would you like to go through the notes again?
Well, no, we got. It's not GG yet. We have to read it because we're trying to 100%. We're trying to 100% the game. Remember. So we heard the solution. Now we need to read the solution.
There were a number of strands of the case that had the solution.
25th November, 1888. Metropolitan Police Number 6, Special Report, 20th of October, 1888. Statements made to Inspector G. Lestrade of Scotland Yard on events surrounding the death of Sir Charles Baskerville and threats to the life of his nephew, Sir Henry Baskerville. I was called down to Devonshire on urgent business by Mr. Sherlock Holmes on the morning of the 19th October, and arrived that afternoon. We proceeded immediately to stand guard outside the house of Mr. Stapleton, whence I subsequently played a major part in saving the life of Sir Henry Baskerville from a hideous murder plot by the aforesaid Stapleton. Every sign suggested the criminal lost his own life by fleeing into the Grimpen mire. I had already received the main facts about the case from Mr. Holmes, including his suspicions about the death of Sir Charles Baskerville in May of this year. 3 further interviews have helped to clarify aspects of the case. Mr. Sherlock Holmes: I had been following my own inquiries in Devonshire for some time, before I revealed my presence to Dr. Watson and Sir Henry Baskerville. I knew already that Stapleton was not the man's real name, and that the lady who passed as Miss Stapleton was in reality his wife. He foresaw that she would be very much more useful to him in the character of a free woman, and he knew that Sir Henry's falling in love with her could do no harm to anyone except Sir Henry. He took particular care that Sir Henry did not make love to her, as Dr. Watson himself observed. It was this man who had dogged Sir Henry and Dr. Mortimer in London, and the warning received by Sir Henry came from his wife. The reason I know this is because he so far forgot himself as to tell Dr. Watson a true piece of autobiography upon the occasion when they first met, and I dare say that Stapleton did many times regret it since. He was once a schoolmaster in the north of England. Now, there is no one more easy to trace than a schoolmaster. There are scholastic agencies by which one may identify a man who has been in the profession. A little investigation showed me that a school had come to grief under atrocious circumstances, and that the man who had owned it, the name was different, had disappeared with his wife. The description agreed. When I learned that the missing man was devoted to entomology, the identification was complete. Dr. Watson's interview with Mrs. Laura Lyons also shed light on her own situation. I did not know about a projected divorce between herself and her husband. In that case, regarding Stapleton as an unmarried man, she counted no doubt upon becoming his wife. When she became undeceived, we learned a great deal about the machinations of the man. Mrs. Laura Lyons: Mr. Holmes came to see me on the morning of the 19th October, and it was then that I learned that the so-called Mr. Stapleton was married to the lady who had passed as his sister. I admit that I was greatly shocked by the news, and found it hard to believe, but Mr. Holmes proved it to me with a photograph of the couple taken in New York under the name of Vandalore, and descriptions by people who knew them at the time they kept St. Oliver's private school. I had no doubt of their identity. The man had offered me marriage on condition that I could get a divorce from my husband. The villain had lied to me in every conceivable way. Not one word of truth has he ever told me. And why? Why? I imagined that it was all for my own sake, but now I see that I was never anything but a tool in his hands. Why should I try to shield him from the consequences of his own wicked acts? One thing I swear to you, and that is that when I wrote the letter I never dreamed of any harm to the old gentleman who had been my kindest friend. It was Stapleton who dictated the letter I sent to Sir Charles. The reason he gave was that I would receive help from Sir Charles for the legal expenses connected with my divorce. And then, after I had sent the letter, he dissuaded me from keeping the appointment by telling me that it would hurt his self-respect that any other man should find the money for such an object, and that though he was a poor man himself, he would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us. He made me swear to say nothing about my appointment with Sir Charles in case I was suspected of his death. He frightened me into remaining silent, but I had my suspicions. I knew him, but if he had kept faith with me, I should have always done so with him. Mrs. Stapleton Vandalore: My husband had failed in the north. He had brought the school to disaster. When we moved down south, he promised me that he would find a way to staking our claim to the family fortune. He forced me to agree to be represented as his sister instead of his wife, but I refused to help him in laying a trap for Sir Charles. He distressed me thenceforward, and dared not leave me long out of his sight. It was for this reason that he took me to London with him. We lodged at the Mexborough Private Hotel in Craven Street, where he kept me imprisoned in my room. Wishing to warn Sir Henry, but fearing discovery by my husband, I adopted the expedient of cutting out the words which would form my message, and addressing the letter in a disguised hand. Back in Devonshire, I tried to warn Sir Henry again, and knowing that he was falling in love with me, I tried not to encourage him, for fear that it would only lead him deeper into my husband's trap. I learned something of the death of the convict, and I knew that the Hound was being kept in the outhouse on the evening Sir Henry was coming to dinner. I taxed my husband with his intended crime, and a furious scene followed in which he told me for the first time that Mrs. Laura Lyons was a rival in his affections. I swore that I would revenge myself on him, and so he tied me up, which is how Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson discovered me. It was not the first time he had used physical violence against me. My arms are mottled with bruises. My mind and soul are tortured and defiled. I could endure it all: ill usage, solitude, a life of deception, everything, as long as I could cling to the hope that I had his love. But now I know that in this also I have been his dupe and his tool. Oh, well, G. Lestrade wrote it down, but that wasn't Lestrade talking.
From Private School Agency, York, to Holmes. Confirms St. Oliver's School collapsed 4 years ago due to financial mismanagement. Stop. Headmaster Vandalore and wife disappeared dubious circumstances. Stop. Authorities welcome information whereabouts and further questioning. Stop. PSA.
Oh, a public service announcement? No, it's the Private School Agency in York.
One bloodhound.
I'm actually no longer sorry for picking this. No, it is not a game, but I have enjoyed this. Eppo should take up a new occupation as an audiobook performer.
Baskerville. Family legend of spectral hound exploited to murder baronet, threaten life of immediate heir, and clear inheritance for criminal cousin. October 1888. Special features. 1. Cunning use of local fears and Dartmoor atmosphere. 2. Hound provides untraceable associate and agent of murder. 3. Man and wife masquerade as siblings to set romantic trap. 4. Stolen boot lures Hound on victim's trail. 5. Borrowed clothes call down fatal justice on escaped convict. 6. Criminal brazenly identifies himself as Sherlock Holmes. 7. Client's life endangered by delays in trapping suspect. Festina lente. Too much haste wastes chance to catch pursuer. 9. Ancestor's portrait proves criminal to be physical and spiritual throwback from 17th century.
Throwback?
A study
Awesome.
of family portraits is enough to convert a man to the doctrine of reincarnation. Relevant monographs. Exotic fonts and bourgeois faces. Manuscript interpretations. And Perfumed Ladies, not completed at that time. Associates: Lestrade of Scotland Yard, the boy Cartwright from Wilson's Regent Street Messenger Office, Watson, who played his usual sterling role.
As usual. All right. Ooh, so we got like the epilogue now, I imagine. Thank you, BDR, for those 100 bits. Oh man, it would be quite a thing to to read audiobooks. Well, I guess I kind of have. I don't know. Oh man. Oh god, Eiley. Well, then you'll want to check out our Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney playthrough, in which I suffered through 40 plus hours of nonsense. All right, Sunday, 25th November. A raw and foggy night. Holmes and I on either side of a blazing fire in our old sitting room at Baker Street. My friend in excellent spirits over the success which had attended a succession of difficult cases since the tragic upshot of our visit to Devonshire, and in particular 2 affairs of the utmost importance. in the first of which he had exposed the atrocious conduct of Colonel Upwood, while in the second he had defended the unfortunate Mademoiselle Montpensier from the charge of murder which hung over her in connection with the death of her stepdaughter, Mademoiselle Carrère. Oh, I guess it was Madame Montpensier. Okay. I had waited patiently for such an opportunity to induce him to discuss the details of the Baskerville mystery, for I was aware that he would never permit cases to overlap. Sir Henry and Dr. Mortimer were, however, in London, on their way to that long voyage which had been recommended for the restoration of Sir Henry's shattered nerves. They had called upon Holmes this very afternoon, so that it was natural that the subject should come up for discussion. He said that he could not guarantee he carried all of the facts in his mind, but I noted his comments as well as I could. The familiar portrait did not lie. Stapleton was a Baskerville, the son of that Roger Baskerville, the younger brother of Sir Charles, who fled with a sinister reputation to South America, where he was said to have died unmarried. He did, as a matter of fact, marry, and had one child, this fellow, whose real name is the same as his father's. He married Beryl Garcia, one of the beauties of Costa Rica, and having purloined a considerable sum of public money, he changed his name to Vandalore, and fled to England, where he established a school in the east of Yorkshire. Okay, so that was the same actress, and that made sense why. Okay, great. Having struck up an acquaintance upon the voyage home with a consumptive tutor called Fraser, whose ability he used, but who shortly died. The school began well, but sank from disrepute into infamy. Vandalore changed his name and moved south. He cultivated a friendship with Sir Charles and with his neighbors, but it was only when he learned of Sir Charles's superstitions concerning the grim legend, and of the old man's weak heart, that he thought of a way by which the baronet could be done to death without suspicion. The dog he bought in London, the most savage he could buy, and the use of artificial means to make the creature diabolical was a flash of genius. He had already on his insect hunts learned to penetrate the grimpen mire, and so had found a safe hiding place for the creature. On one or two instances, when he was seen by peasants, so that the legend demon dog received a new confirmation, but Sir Charles could not be decoyed outside of his grounds at night. Neither threats nor blows could persuade Stapleton's wife to lure him to his ruin. His chance came when Sire Charles made him the minister of his charity in the case of Mrs. Laura Lyons. By representing himself as a single man, he acquired complete influence over her. When he learned that Sir Charles was about to leave the hall on Dr. Mortimer's advice, he persuaded Mrs. Lyons to write the letter imploring the old man to give her an interview on the evening before his departure for London. He then, by a special argument, prevented her from going, and so had the chance he desired. Driving back from Coombe Tracy, he got his hound, treated it with his infernal paint, and brought the beast round to the gate. The dog, incited by his master, sprang over and pursued the baronet, who fled screaming down the yew alley and fell dead from heart disease and terror. The hound had kept upon the grassy border while the old man had run down the path, so that no track but the man's was visible. On seeing him lying still, the creature had approached to sniff at him, but finding him dead had turned away. It was then that it left the print which was actually observed by Dr. Mortimer. The devilish cunning of it was that it would be almost impossible to make a case against the real murderer. His only accomplice was one who could never give him away. Both Mrs. Lyons and Mrs. Stapleton had their different suspicions, but each was under his influence. Learning about the arrival of Henry Baskerville from his friend Dr. Mortimer, Stapleton first thought that the young heir might be done to death in London. Mrs. Stapleton's statement explains why she went there with her husband. It was essential for him to get some article of Sir Henry's attire, so that he might later set the dog on his track. No doubt he bribed the boots or chambermaid. By chance, the first boot was a new one, and therefore useless. He needed an old one, which proved that we were dealing with a real hound. From his general conduct, I am inclined to think that Stapleton's career of crime has not been limited to this single affair. During the last 3 years, there have been 4 considerable burglaries in the West Country, for none of which was any criminal arrested. The last of these at Folkestone Court in May was remarkable for the cold-blooded pistoling of the page, who surprised the masked and solitary burglar. I believe that, in the absence of his master, it was the old manservant at Merripit House, Anthony, who cared for the hound. He had known the Stapletons in their schoolmastering days, and has now escaped the country. The man, like Mrs. Stapleton, spoke good English, but with a curious lisping accent. Anthony is not a common name in England, while Antonio is so in all Spanish or Spanish-American countries. I have myself seen him cross the mire by the path which Stapleton marked out. You may remember when I examined the note warning Sir Henry in London that I held it close to my eyes. In so doing, I was conscious of a faint smell of white jessamine, which suggested the presence of a lady, and already my thoughts began to turn toward the Stapletons. Thus, I had made certain of the hound, and had guessed at the criminal before ever we went to the West Country. I could not come down openly for fear of putting Stapleton on his guard. I stayed for the most part in Coombe Tracey, and only used the hut when it was necessary to be near the scene of action. Cartwright greatly assisted me, not only with food and clean linen, but also by watching you when I was watching Stapleton. Your own reports were forwarded from Baker Street to Coombe Tracey, and were of great service to me, especially that one truthful piece of biography of Stapleton's. The case had been complicated by the incident of the escaped convict. This also you cleared up in a very effective way, though I had come to the same conclusions from my own observations. By the time you discovered me, I had a complete knowledge of the whole business, but I had not a case which could go to a jury. Even Stapleton's attempt upon Sir Henry, which ended in the death of the unfortunate convict, did not help us much in proving murder against our man. There was no alternative but to catch him red-handed, and to do so, we had to use Sir Henry, alone and apparently unprotected, as a bait. We did so, and at the cost of a severe shock to our client, we succeeded in completing our case and driving Stapleton to his destruction. A long journey may enable our friend to recover not only from his shattered nerves, but also from his wounded feelings. His love for the lady was deep and sincere, and to him the saddest part of all this black business was that he should have been deceived by her. There can be no doubt that Stapleton exercised an influence over his wife, which may have been love, or may have been fear, or possibly both, since they are by no means incompatible emotions. It was at least absolutely effective, though he found the limits of his power over her when he devoured to make her the direct accessory to murder. She tried again and again to warn Sir Henry. Stapleton himself seems to have been capable of jealousy, and when he saw the baronet paying court to the lady, even though it was part of his own plan, still he could not help interrupting with a passionate outburst which revealed the fiery soul which his self-contained manner so cleverly concealed. By encouraging the intimacy, he made it certain that Sir Henry would frequently come to Merripit House, and that he would sooner or later get the opportunity which he desired. You already know of the furious scene that must have occurred when his wife discovered his relationship with Laura Lyons. By tying her up, that she might have had no chance of warning Sir Henry, he hoped, no doubt, that when the whole countryside put down the baronet's death to the curse of the family, he could win his wife back to accept an accomplished fact, and to keep silent upon what she knew. In this I fancy that, in any case, he made a miscalculation, and that, if we had not been there, his doom would none the less have been sealed. A woman of Spanish blood does not condone such an injury so lightly. Holmes concluded that, without referring to his notes, he could not give a more detailed account of this curious case, but it seemed to me that he had left one essential unexplained. If Stapleton came into the succession, how could he explain the fact that he, the heir, had been living unannounced under another name so close to the property? For once Holmes was at a loss, and admitted that it was a formidable difficulty. He feared that I asked too much when I expected him to solve it. Oh, wow. Oh, we have a different font here. The letter font. Sunday, 25th of November. Holmes thought to give me a treat this evening to celebrate our long partnership. He had a box for Les Huguenots and was enthusiastic about Des Resques. I would rather have gone to the music hall or to a Gilbert and Sullivan, but Holmes made up for it by an excellent dinner beforehand at Marcini's, so I slept through most of the program. Of course, I was well prepared with the critics' views when I discussed the performances with my new partner in life, it being important to bring experience to any partnership from both sides, as Holmes and I did when working together. With this in mind, I have been reading much of late and greatly interested in Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, an attempt at a scientific novel, which is based, I believe, on a real case with which Holmes himself had some dealings a few years back. I do find Stevenson's Kidnapped quite as good and full of much more action. I have told Holmes, of course, that the Baskerville case must be my last with him. I was not well received when I returned to London, having been 3 weeks in Devonshire, and not the few days that I had promised. Mrs. Hudson was very stern with me, and so was Mrs. Forrester, my beloved's landlady. All was well in the end at Camberwell when all was explained, and I do think that I gained some credit, and in a most attentive audience when I gave an account of my adventures and perils of Dartmoor. The ladies gasped most affectingly when I described the horrors of the Hound. I shall miss Baker Street and Holmes, even Mrs. Hudson, though I intend to spend some pleasant domestic evenings compiling the records of previous cases I have shared with Holmes. I cannot believe that this is the end of our association, but I have given further promises not to go away again, and I must hold to them, at least for a while.
I have told Holmes that the Baskerville case must be my last. However, created by Michael Hodges, John Chasey, Fergus MacNeil, Clement Chambers, Adrian Turner, and Simon Goodenough.
If it's good enough for them, it's damn well good enough for you.
Go through the notes again?
No, thank you. All right, so after 4 hours and 48 minutes and 59 seconds, the Hound of the Baskervilles has barked his last bark. He scared Sir Charles Baskerville to death, but then later was shot dead by Sherlock Holmes several times. His master, the evil Stapleton, was masquerading.
You're so good.
He was really a different Baskerville. And yes, it was an audiobook for all of sorts. Yeah, adapted for the CD-ROM media with all of its photographs and documents and notes and things. Oh man! All right, let's chew out 5 Cedric for the end of the game.
5 hours, 5 years. What does it mean?
I don't know, but thank you for the 5 months. Tier 3 sub, thank you, Uncle. Thank you so much. The Scoby supporters. Yeah, so it's kind of underwhelming, right? Like, it's a great story, of course, The Hound of the Baskervilles, but yeah, it's hard to call it a real game, isn't it? I think so. Yeah, it's basically... They should have just done more interactive with it. I mean, you know, it was early days, 1991, very early days of CD-ROM software, period. But I'm very curious as to how this was marketed. Very curious, because that would matter a lot. But yeah, I wonder what probably was such a novelty at the time that people were like, oh my gosh, they're talking on my computer and everything. I don't know. I think probably the novelty factor at the time is better than looking back on it. Obviously, it doesn't hold up well. I also wonder what the experience would be like if you just listened to the narrator do it all and you didn't actually read any of it. There'd be a lot of gaps in it. The map was like utterly useless. It would have been cool if they had tried to gamify it a little bit more by having some sort of interface for guessing about the solution or whatever. I don't know. It just seems weird too, because it's like anyone who'd be interested in buying this probably already knew the story. I think it's the most famous Sherlock Holmes story. I don't know. So it's just kind of strange all along. Yeah, it got poor reviews at the time. That's true. So, yeah. Did you remember to take your schizophrenia medication? 12 out of 100. Yeah, there's just not, I don't know, it's not very interactive. I mean, you know, I like that they reproduce some documents and stuff, but even the transcription or adaptation of the story was sloppy. There were plenty of typos in it and stuff. And I just don't think it it seemed kind of lazy. That's generally the problem. It's kind of lazy. Even for what it was. But thank you for the pick nonetheless, BDR. Interesting to see it. This is by the same crew that did Psycho Killer and The Town with No Name. Oh yeah, who could forget the Sharpie mustache? Great point, Mike. Yeah, that was a thing. That was crazy.
Score!
And Eppo learned why not to enforce the mystery of the Stapleons on Moby.
The Stapleons. The Stapleons. It's true. It's true. You preferred Psycho Killer, yeah. But even if you consider it as like an audiobook, it doesn't really play out that way. I mean, I think books on tape did exist back then. So maybe books on CD might have even existed back then too, actually. This was trying to do something else different. I mean, I appreciate maybe they experimented a little bit here, but I don't think it was terribly successful. Even if you think of it less as a game, but as an audio book, I also don't think it works as that. It doesn't work that way. I don't think it works even as that. Mr. Viking, thank you for the 48 months. Thank you, Mr. Viking. Oh, that gets you another Subiversary pick. Thank you, Mr. Viking. All right, so without further ado, let's head to our Hall of Adventure. Bookcase number 2. Game 342. Hound of the Baskervilles. Put it up on the shelf.